Well, and it's a busy time for you, given everything the government's having to deal with right now. But let's get right to the question of what this is going to mean for the Philippine economy. When we look at first quarter growth, when you look at growth for the year.
Well, I think it's going to be lower than what we expected. This surge in the contagion, which is incidentally happening in Brazil, Canada, France, and Turkey and other places, is certainly not good for the economy. However, we just want to emphasize that our death rate is much, much lower than other Western countries. We only have, I think, 12 deaths per 100,000, and other countries have over 150 deaths per 100,000. We are coping with this surge, and the best way we thought to do it was to have a curtailment of activities, especially in Metro Manila area, for at least 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, and I think that's very important to emphasize that the death rates are much lower than other parts of the world. But in terms of how you're going to manage this, aside from cutting corporate taxes, managing all the bad loans, what other steps can the government take to ensure adequate fiscal support for the economy?
Well, we, as I mentioned several times, our fiscal support, our support to the economy has come in 3 basic ways. Number one, last year, we granted our citizen, or the poorest of our citizens, a cash handout of around $5 billion US dollars.
Okay.
And this year, we've done another one around 500 million US dollars for this 2-week lockdown. That's number one. Number two, the monetary authorities have made sure that the economy is flush with cash, so that the credit doesn't get locked down. So they have injected a lot of cash into the economy by lowering our reserve requirements primarily. They have also advanced to the Philippine government around 10 billion, a little over 10 billion US dollars in a loan, which is of course used by us to cover our budget deficits.
All right.
And third, as you mentioned, we have recently passed legislation to lower corporate income taxes for large corporations by 5 percentage points.
All right.
From 30% to 25%. And for small corporations, less than $100,000, from 30% to 20%.
Well, Secretary Dominguez, do you have any plans to tap the central bank, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, for more loans this year?
We already have, as I said, over a little over 10 billion US dollars.
Okay.
And
you're gonna do more of that?
Discuss any plans to increase that amount?
You don't. Okay. Do you think you'll ask for an extension, or are you going to pay off that $540 billion peso loan from the central bank?
We will probably look to wind it down sometime late this year or early next year, depending on the situation, of course.
Okay. Well, but I just want to come quickly back just to clarify something. Sounds like you're saying you get a little hit to the economic growth, but your growth target 6.5% to 7.5%. You don't think it's going to drop very much. How much do you think it might drop, or do you think it's negligible?
Well, for this lockdown, probably will cost us 0.5%.
Okay. Okay. Well, that
growth.
Yeah. Well, in terms of more borrowing, any plans to borrow in the U.S. dollar bond market?
Yes, we will tap the U.S. bond market before rates skyrocket. And incidentally, we just issued the first ever zero-rated samurai bond, and that was last week. of about 500 million US dollars.
That was certainly a big step. Are you concerned about how much debt is going to go up right now? I think, a lot of countries are just saying we have to do this, but are you concerned that it could balloon? Do you think the government needs to set a cap on the borrowing?
Yes, we have set a cap, and our cap is 60% of GDP. Right now, we started out 2020 at 39.5% of GDP as our debt, and we have increased it to around 54% as of now. We have to keep in mind, of course, that the foreign reserves of the Philippines are already 110 billion US dollars, and that's actually higher than our total foreign debt.
Okay. Are you considering any new taxes in the Philippines to help pay for all this?
At this point in time, we don't have any plans to introduce new tax measures. Although I must confess that yesterday I talked to our staff and I said, we have to start thinking of winding down this debt, and by sometime next year, and we have to look at potential revenue sources. So they're working on it right now.
Any idea what those revenue sources might be?
No, not at this point.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you about climate change because this year you have become the head of the Philippines Climate Change Commission. And I know one of the things that you have called for is climate justice to get the more developed, richer countries who you say are responsible for so much of the carbon emissions to cut them back and cut back on things like the typhoons that have been hitting the Philippines so hard. Do you think you can move the dial on that this year?
Well, we are engaged in discussions with our own citizens as well as preparing our nationally determined plan. And we will present it and look at asking the more developed nations to cut some more, although we are ready to do our share. However, let me just point out something. When I was assigned the Climate Change Commission, I told them that, after 10 years of their existence, the average Filipino actually has no idea of how he can contribute to mitigating climate change. So I said our goal this year is very simple. I want to bring home the point to the average Filipino that he can contribute.
Right.
And to do that, we are asking Congress to pass a law banning single-use plastics. So every day, if that law is in effect, every day, each and every Filipino has a means to contribute to climate change mitigation.
Well, speaking of climate change, it isn't exactly a link, but I'm wondering about airlines and discussions with the government. And I want to note for our viewers that years ago, in one of your many corporate jobs, you ran the Philippine Airlines for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So it's near and dear to your heart. Are you? Where are they now? You pretty much said most of the assistance has to come from the private sector. Is there? Do you continue to hold that stance? How does this look to you?
Yes. In fact, I have to say that one of the best things that President Cory Aquino did was to privatize Philippine Airlines and get the government out of the airline business. And at this point in time, I've told people I do not want the government to get back into the airline business because that is not our role. However, as I mentioned, we are ready to support private sector efforts. And one airline, Cebu Pacific, put together a 45 billion peso rescue fund, of which our two government banks participated to the extent of less than 18% of that amount. So it is private sector led, but supported by the Philippine government. Philippine Airlines has not come up with a specific plan as of now, since they have announced that they will first take the step of going into Chapter 11 in the U.S. So we're waiting for
Okay.
an opportunity to discuss with them their exactly what their plans are, and see whether or not there is enough private sector support that the government can back up to.
You know, I want to ask you a question about inflation because there's been caps, government caps on prices. They're about ready to end.
Yes.
So, more steps to guard from spillover effects from inflation on the economy, and it's certainly been rising in the Philippines. Food prices is one big reason, but it's a difficult
Yes.
situation for policymakers. What do you expect to see with inflation this year?
Well, first of all, we still hold on to our target of 2 to 4%. Right now, we are slightly over 4% year to date. I believe the inflation numbers will be announced today, and I'm hoping that they show a decline in our inflation rates. Now, we have to look at the source of the inflation. Actually, it is really meat that has been driving it up. You know, Philippines is a large consumer of pork.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we were hit by the ASF, as
Okay.
other countries have been hit. And we imposed price controls
Right.
merely as a shock to hold back the prices,
Okay.
while we decreased our tariff rates and increase the
Okay.
amount of pork that is allowed to come in.
Yeah. All right.
We're not using price controls as the only means
Okay.
to hold back prices,
Right.
but we are actually increasing supply.
All right.
Because this is a supply-driven issue.
Okay. Quickly, I want to ask you one more thing, because as the IMF and World Bank meetings are getting underway, the last time we spoke in person, that's where we were. Quick answer,
Yeah.
please. But what's the number one thing you would like to hear as the Secretary of Finance of the Philippines, a longtime government policymaker? What's the biggest thing you'd like to hear coming out of those meetings this week?
I'd like to hear of solutions to the world debt problem. Okay, this is a problem of ours, as well as problems of many other countries. I think the discussions in the World Bank and the IMF will be very helpful in enlightening us and giving us new ideas on how to handle this new situation, this new debt situation brought about by the pandemic. I am sure your Secretary Yellen is also
Yes.
going to contribute to that discussion, because the U.S. debt also has ballooned.
Right. Yeah.